All right, so hello guys, welcome back to the Existential Lounge. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than what we were usually doing. There's that recent Jubilee video where Jordan Peterson was on debating 20 atheists, and this has kind of gone viral because it's a very in-your-face indicator of the decline in mental acuteness that Jordan Peterson has had, and a lot of people are taking note and noticing that in this video in particular, where he seems to not be making any points or stances. He's kind of just rambling on.
Yeah, it seems he's definitely kind of like stepping back into this shroud of ambiguity with a lot of the stances he's making. And I think also just the main stances that he declares as his positions against the atheists in and of themselves aren't very powerful claims, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think none of the claims he's making necessarily prove the point of a Judeo-Christian God, which even that in and of itself is frustrating because he doesn't make the point that he doesn't take the stance that he believes or doesn't believe in them. And while I think that no one is required to publicly take that stance, you kind of are if you agree to jump on one of these types of videos, where I'm sure that Jubilee made it clear to Peterson and his agents that, or managers or whoever's handling Jordan Peterson's bookings.
Yeah.
They made it clear, hey, this is going to be a 20 atheists versus the one Christian being yourself, and that's the format of this video. Do you agree to sign on? And he agreed. And then being on the video itself, he refuses to take the stance of which side he's on.
Yeah, and them changing the title is very telling and interesting also.
Right. Originally, it was one Christian versus 20 atheists,
Correct.
and they had to change it to Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists.
Yeah.
It just... I think it's kind of unfair of him to have done that to Jubilee to begin with.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also telling when you see the reactions of a lot of these people. They were rubbed the wrong way. They seemed frustrated, not just because of... It was a lot of his approach to it, the ambiguity, and then the hiding within the shroud, playing word salad.
Right. Likewise, how it was likely made clear to him, it was also likely made clear to them, hey, you're coming on as an atheist to argue against a Christian.
Yeah.
And they were prepared to do that. And then when they show up, the guy who they're arguing against is like, I'm actually not believing too much. So it's kind of an unfair stance that he took, and it kind of hijacks the video, in my opinion.
Definitely. I agree with that.
So anyways, long intro, but what we're essentially going to be doing today is picking up a couple of the interactions that Peterson had in the video, ones that we think show his inability really to make the argument for what he's supposed to be making the argument, and also a few that we think the other people did really well in and that we can maybe add some more insight. So without further ado, let's get into it. This first one is with Jordan Peterson's initial claim that atheists don't understand the God they're rejecting.
Mr. Peterson,
How you doing?
so this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics, like I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study?
I think that's a cool person to have on, right? It brings a lot of insight that I don't think a lot of people would have. He was likely brought up in a Christian household, went into these things and studied to become a priest to teach these specific teachings, and something along the line didn't click enough for him, so much so that he's now arguing on the side of atheism. It's a
refreshing take, because usually it's people that come from some sort of bias, initial bias, but going from one side to the other is a refreshing take and is indicative of they can critically think and have the information pertaining to the opposing side, and must have been exposed to a sufficient amount on the other to like inch their way. You know?
Right. I think most people start off with one or the other and stick with it.
Exactly.
When you go from one to the other, you have the ability to argue it all the better because you have such a deep foundation in the opposite already.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what he has to say.
Both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So there's always the part.
I don't like that already. Off the bat, his making the claim that he of necessity must have missed something in order to no longer believe.
Yeah.
It wasn't a fault in the ideology. It couldn't have been. It must have been a fault on you. I don't like that approach. Especially if you're making it just after talking to someone for 15 seconds. Maybe if he knew him some more, maybe if he had some insight into how his transition happened, right, then you can make such a claim. But to make that claim off the bat, it just seems in bad faith.
Possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out.
So not even, I don't know if there was a fault in your claim. It's, that will take a long time to figure out.
Yeah.
Still holding on to that initial, there was still a fault though.
Yeah.
It'll take a long time for us to break it down, find it out, and see what it was exactly. But there was a fault nonetheless.
Yeah.
True Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
Well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheists claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold. Is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
That must exist for you to be atheist. You can't be atheist because you've logically come to a conclusion. You may disagree with the logic that has brought upon that conclusion, but to say that there is an inability to have a logical process to becoming an atheist, you must of necessity have been hurt by something.
Yeah.
What are you doing? That's not a good argument.
No.
An argument that I would think is beneath someone like Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, it's very condescending.
Right.
That the only way to have that position is like through some extreme rather than a formulation of logic and just reasoning to be like, okay, well, does it make sense? And sure, even if in his perspective, it was like wrong or whatever, at least give it credence that it would require logic to come to the conclusion that, God doesn't exist.
Right. Entering a debate with already thinking of the opposition as lesser, it's not a good way to approach debate. It's in bad faith in general, and I think he's doing that here. I'm just not a big fan of how he conducts himself in this interaction from the get-go, and it continues throughout.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like three people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God?
I think that should have been how he started it, right?
Yeah.
If your claim is atheists don't understand the God they're rejecting, have the atheist that comes sit down define the God he's rejecting.
Yeah.
And then if that doesn't fit whatever definition you wanted to begin with, then explain how they're missing the mark.
Yeah, I think they should have both done that. Like, describe the God you're speaking about and then
Right.
the one that we're rejecting, and then move forward from there, because otherwise we're just fighting ghosts.
Exactly. No pun intended.
God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like...
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other.
Yeah, that's the insane thing, because it's a matter of language, and as long as we speak the same language, we can communicate what my God is and how that is exclusively different than what your God is.
Right. And so I disagree with his point that if they're all mutually exclusive, then we wouldn't be able to communicate. That's where he takes it a step far.
Yeah.
However, I do agree with him that everybody doesn't have a mutually exclusive version of God. There might be some different sects of religions that do have mutually exclusive beliefs.
Yeah.
However, I don't think that each person has a mutually exclusive God to the next. That's also just seems like a reach on his part.
Yeah.
The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible interpretation.
It's the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant?
That is
straw man.
Yeah, straw man and just bad faith debate 101.
Yeah.
So what do you mean? If I am rejecting that your interpretation is the only interpretation, it does not mean that by default I believe that the opposite is true.
Yeah.
It just means that I'm saying that yours doesn't necessarily have to be the one.
Yeah.
That's my point. It seems like Jordan Peterson is arguing in a way that you would expect someone without experience in debate to argue.
Yeah, and he's a veteran in this field, especially when it comes to speaking about religion. It seems weird that he's coming out of the gates swinging in a way that is just like
swinging and missing. Sense, that's the thing. He's hitting, trying to hit homers, but just striking out every time.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense to me because I grew up watching him and Sam Harris debate.
Yeah,
and even though I disagreed with him because he was arguing on the religious side, I always respected his approach to debate and to arguing, and even said that sometimes he got the better of Sam Harris because his logic made more sense.
Yeah.
But this is elementary debate. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Strawmanning your opposition into saying that a negation of your claim being the truth means of necessity that the opposite is.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
And especially given his first claim, atheists don't understand the God they're rejecting. You yourself haven't made clear the God that you are arguing exists.
Right.
And so right now, even though they're going on these different tangents and all of that, it's still getting away from, well, what are we attacking? Because both of them are shooting without targets.
Right, exactly. And the other guy, at least to a degree, has tried to define God a little bit.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson hasn't done much of that. I think he's about to here now, speaking about Exodus and how God presented himself to Moses in Exodus. But outside of this, he's not really making an argument.
Yeah.
Alternative claim
I'm
is
saying
that
we
he's
can't
good.
know. Because we can't talk to those authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
and we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could.
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the.
The irritability that he has is also unwarranted, I think. There's nothing has been said that warrants this level of anger in his responses.
And it's sustained throughout the entire video.
Yeah. It's odd. It's just odd. I don't know how else to describe it, but that it's odd that he has this disposition to debate.
I said
That is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs so he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable, it's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner.
So that, I think, is the best argument he's had against this right now. So his claim is the way that God presented himself to Moses in Exodus was a mysterious figure whose Moses only saw the back of between the two cliffs. Forgive me, I don't know Exodus off the top of my head perfectly, but generally that's how it's depicted. He kind of just saw a figure between the two cliffs that walked by. He saw the back of him. And so it's this very vague figure.
But that is how, in my opinion, atheists have viewed God, because God is described as that. He's speaking from like a burning bush. He's always this elusive figure that doesn't show his face.
Right. So I think what Peterson is saying, which is highly reductive again, he's saying that the God that atheists are refuting is the bearded man in the sky that...
Yeah, but I don't disagree. I mean, I don't agree with that. I think that...
Me either. I don't think most people are, or most atheists are debating against that God.
Yeah. It is that elusive God that is, you're supposed to put your faith in, that does sort of, tease our trust in a way,
right,
where it's like, oh, I'm showing you just enough of me to play with your mind, and like, oh, but you have to trust, because that's like where the love comes from. And I'd say that none of what happens in that story is anything new in it, and is very in alignment with how we would regularly look at God and his mystical behaviors and elusivity and kind of these, it kind of reminds me of when a kid, like as a kid, we all kind of sat in our room and would be like, all right, if you're real, turn on the lights or turn off the lights or move the controller. Nothing would happen. So like playing these games of like, how real are you? This is seen in this story, I believe, with Moses.
Yeah, definitely. The best way to put it, I think that the God that most atheists are rejecting is the tri-omni God that is described by most theologians.
Yeah.
So the guy who's all-loving, all-powerful, and... I'm sorry.
All-knowing? Or all-powerful?
All-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving.
Yeah, all-loving.
So the omnibenevolent, omnitemporal, omniscient, and omnipotent God.
Yeah.
That's the one that we're rejecting. And he's saying that that's not the God that is described in the Bible in the specific section of Exodus.
This seems very cherry picky.
It does, right?
It's strange.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. Help, especially the audience, kind of like boil this down. There was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No,
Is that...
I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a
Okay,
problem
let's
with
pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out.
So he gets voted off here, but I want to touch on what he just said there, is that we're essentially not even arguing your point here anymore. We're arguing definitions.
Yeah.
And to make an analogy of what he's saying is, I could say, Brandon, you don't believe in laptops. And you tell me, well, what laptop do I not believe in? I don't believe in the laptops that are computers that are portable and you can put on your lap, have keys, have a screen. I'm like, no, but what if I define laptop as something else and you don't believe in that?
Yeah.
Well, okay, but now you're just broadening your definition to include other stuff, so that therefore, no matter what I say, you're not believing in laptop anymore.
Correct.
It's not a good argument.
Yeah.
You can't just say you don't understand the God you don't believe in. Well, yes, I do. It's this, this, and this. Well, actually, no, it's everything. And so if you believe in anything, therefore you believe in God.
Yeah.
It's so circular, which is kind of ironic, seeing as to how later on he makes an issue with Parker bringing up what he calls a circular definition.
Yeah. I see that.
Yeah. Here we're going on to the next claim that Jordan Peterson made, which was that morality cannot be found in science.
Yeah.
I'll let him make his stance on it, but essentially he's saying that morality is something that is fundamentally found in God, and therefore, or I'm sorry, I don't even think that's his claim. His claim is more direct than that.
God
it's
is
that
like morality.
God is morality.
Yeah.
It's not a conditional, but rather a definition.
Yeah.
And Parker comes in to argue this one.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He's a major influence on all of Catholic social.
Yes.
That just seemed like bad faith. Like he's like, oh, what typical Christians? You know that typical Christians believe in the triomnies,
Right.
and all in one, and like that is what God is. He's playing like, all Christians actually believe in the one that I'm defining as, and like this is the norm. Like, no, it's not the norm, and you know that. You've studied this, you've spoken with tons of people that are religious in these circles, having similar stances. They don't believe, the majority do not. I have never heard anyone make the claims as like of a religious stance that he's making. They seem, in my opinion, let me know what your thought is, almost exclusively unique to him.
Not entirely, because he brings up a guy here, but that's my next issue.
But yeah, but like one guy, it's just colloquially, people just collectively are viewing it in the ways that all these atheists believe and observe as. It is unique. I'd say it's unique insofar as it's not a mass belief. When people say like, what's God? No one's bringing up Peterson's definition of what he believes God is. They're bringing up the omnitemporal, the all-powerful,
Definitely,
ruler, creator that made the universe.
Yes, I agree. And another issue that I have here is Parker says what normal people or the average believer thinks. And then Peterson brings up Cardinal Newman as an example, who is a academic and respected theologian. That is not the average religious person.
No, it's not indicative of what the majority believes and even practices.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, it's one guy, but that's
it's the equivalent of him saying what the average atheist doesn't understand the God you're rejecting, and then I bring up Richard Dawkins. Like, well, Richard Dawkins isn't the average atheist. He is a philosopher, scientist, biologist, etc.
Yeah.
Bringing up a specific academic in order to argue what the average religious person believes doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Theory. How about that, Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
That's the big point that everybody makes. The one that is getting clicks and all that, that's the one. Because he brings up the issue of what does it mean to believe? And this is the weird semantic soup that he starts falling into with all his arguments, that it's frustrating, quite frankly. Like, what do you know what is intended in this context for believe, right? He understands that. He knows that you mean, what do you think to be true? And I think I actually just verbatim said what Parker will in a second defines believe as, and Peterson still doesn't accept that definition. But it's so frustrating because you know what is meant in this situation. Answer the question. Don't fall back into your semantic fog to evade questions that hurt your stance.
Yeah.
You think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say
circular?
you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a
believe
belief?
something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It is.
That also is not a working definition, because you could live for and die for your kids, but that doesn't add anything with regards to ideological components that make up my reality, right?
Yeah.
Like, I will live and die for my kid, but like that doesn't also mean that like how I'm making sense of the world and some truth claim that exists in my mind, that's not a part of it. It doesn't work, in my opinion.
It doesn't work. And it's also just an extreme view, because as Parker will go on to argue, you don't have to die for something in order to believe in it.
Yeah.
There are plenty of things that we can believe and lie about for so many different reasons. Parker uses the extreme of, well, you'd lie to save your life about something. It doesn't even have to be that extreme.
What if you just don't care enough to like die? You're like, I believe it to be true, but like, I
have you ever like passed on an argument with somebody because you're like, this isn't worth engaging?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you don't believe the argument you wanted to make. You're just like, all right, man, sure.
Yeah.
This is just such an extreme take he has here.
Yeah.
That doesn't really make sense.
It's something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you...
But like, all beliefs are a figment of your imagination.
Explain that.
Like, anything that is true is because, I mean, maybe this is a little more abstract philosophy, but like your mind is doing its best to make sense of the external world and is constructing an image, some sensory information, this whole like conglomerate of like cognitive soup that all comes together in such a way to like see something or to make sense of something within your subjective experience of reality. So like to some degree, things that we believe to be true are a figment of our imagination because it's a byproduct of our individualistic experiences and cognition coming together to formulate a thing.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I don't think that's
a little abstract.
It's abstract and it's fun to think about, but I don't think that's
Yeah.
what the context Jordan Peterson was trying to talk about.
100%.
worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't be
life?
so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany,
So there again, he's doing the same thing where he's getting really awkwardly defensive about something that doesn't seem that it constitutes it, right?
Yeah.
So how well do you know me? You don't even know who I am to say if I wouldn't die for what I believe.
Yeah.
I don't think Parker was trying to attack you. It wasn't an insult to say that you will logically lie about something in order to save life.
Yeah.
That's not an insult. And Peterson seems to just be on this constant defensive mode that really just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't understand why he's doing that. And then bringing up his medical practice and all these other things are specifics that in all reality, it just seems like a weird insecurity. Like,
It is coming off like that to me as well. Yeah.
like, oh no, look at these things I didn't lie for. That's not what's in discussion, Jordan.
It sounds like compensation to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying
I
to
know
protect
the
them.
example.
Would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I
they're
would have done
asking?
everything I bloody well could so I wouldn't be in that situation
you
to begin
lie?
with. It's a hypothetical and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you eat
don't
today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just
Yes,
asking if you
you
ate
are.
it.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about.
I think, yeah, Parker's about to get into another thing with regards to, okay, let's say you did everything to not be in that circumstance. There's someone else who might not have achieved what you achieved. Like, let's say you did everything and yeah, you succeeded. Someone else failed.
Right.
What should they do? You know, like,
Sure.
I think that,
I
like,
guess Peterson is saying that if you didn't maximally sin, then you are like it's your fault now that you must sin to get out of your sinful ways. That's his argument, which is not a very good argument because, again, it presupposes that things outside of your control, like, for example, being born in Nazi Germany, was a sin you committed.
yeah.
It doesn't make sense at all.
Like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because
I
you don't
did
like, are you like
clarify.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a
did you-
basic
yeah, yeah.
hypothetical
Like,
where you
like if you-
put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously, you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer
What's-
this.
That seems disingenuous on Peterson's part. So essentially, he's straw manning what Parker was saying there about it being a basic hypothetical. So he's saying, putting a Jewish person's life at stake in Nazi Germany is just basic for you. Well, that wasn't what Parker was saying. No. Parker was saying that the moral justification in this hypothetical is fairly basic, yet you are trying to evade answering it because it will hurt your worldview and the argument you're trying to make. He's saying what Parker is labeling simple is saying you would lie to save someone's life.
Yeah.
He is not saying that putting a Jewish person's life at stake in Nazi Germany is simple. Yeah. That is a straw man to try to evade the question that's being asked because he knows that it will break down his argument.
Yeah. It is basic insofar as the answer is pretty obvious what you should
And that's
do.
what he's talking about, not the actual life of the Jewish person on the line.
Not the context of like the whole situation as to why that's happening to begin with. It's just it's a straw man. It's pointing in the direction of something that like clearly you're missing the point of it being a hypothetical thought experiment.
And it's something that you and I have spoken about a lot before, where I think that a lot of people often miss the point of analogies in debate. The point of the analogy isn't that the context of the analogy is always perfect one-to-one to the situation you're trying to compare it to. It's rather that the underlying principle is the same to what we're trying to talk about. The principle here being you will lie to do something that is of greater good.
Yeah, the
that
skeleton of the hypothetical.
Exactly.
The
skeleton of your analogy parallels to the skeleton of the argument that you're trying to prove. Not that your argument in its entirety, its full context is one-to-one to the analogy you're making. You can compare things that are different which have like underlying principles.
Yeah.
For example, like that whole saying that apples and oranges can't be compared. Yes, they can, because the fundamental principle is fruits.
Yeah.
So you're comparing fruits. You're not saying that an apple is an orange, but they have the comparison of the underlying principle.
Yeah.
And it's just
I think that broadens wisdom also, is to see the broad application of certain concepts too. You know, like sure, it's not one-to-one, but like that's where the utility of understanding how various concepts are applicable in different circumstances.
exactly.
Question.
What's
For
odd-
some reason,
I just told you why.
are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why are
anti-fascist?
you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's not
manner
what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, 'cause I care about
you're-
truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity with that
imagine
respect.
that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So
Right.
you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you like lied in that scenario. So
Not
clearly that's
without
not what
the
you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to
I
die for it.
said-
You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How is
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Great conversation.
Yeah.
So there the interaction ends. Even that part where he says, I need you to abandon this line of questioning.
Yeah.
Why? Because you feel that it is pushing you into a corner that the only way to get out of is to hurt your argument.
Yeah, the only reason to say something like that is as a byproduct of an emotional response and you're feeling uncomfortable.
Exactly. I don't understand how it's playing a game to just get you to clarify your position.
Yeah.
The crux of this is we need to understand what you consider believing something. So I am using an analogy so we can get a better understanding of what that definition is for you.
I'm also confused by something. It seemed as though Peterson is under the belief that in order for undesirable circumstance to make its way into your path, where you may have to lie for the greater good, you had to have done bad things in the past in order to be in a situation like that. Mm-hmm. Why? Like,
I don't fully understand, and if I'm trying to steelman his argument here, it would be that he's saying sin only comes from sin. Lying is a sin, so as of necessity, it must come from you doing sin. If you find yourself in a circumstance where you must commit sin, you got to that circumstance by committing sin. And I think that's his argument. Obviously, I can't know that for sure.
but then he's acting like, oh, I wouldn't be in one like that. Oh, so you're a sinless being. You're this divine, cleansed, like squeaky clean.
Which in and of itself would fall out of the Judeo-Christian ideology that he partly claims to believe, because one of the fundamental things of Christianity is that we all are going to fall short of the grace and the glory of God.
Yeah.
So unless you are perfect like Jesus Christ was, you will sin.
Yeah.
So therefore, of necessity, you will find yourself in situations where you must lie.
Yeah.
It's not a very good argument. And to just keep using Parker's analogy, what's the sin? Explain to me what the sin is that the German citizen made who is trying to hide a Jewish person in their basement.
Yeah.
What sin did they commit that led them to a situation, the circumstance of needing to lie? A sin. It doesn't make sense. It's a very reductive worldview that
Yeah.
bad only comes from bad. That's just not the reality of the world.
Also, how is it viewed? Like, because sin seems it could be very ambiguous, right? Like, lying to save people, you saved people. Like, does which sin outweighs the other and becomes the good. Like saving people, right, seems like a greater good than like you lied, but you saved, right? If you told the truth, but people died, right? It seems like it's more of a reward, more of a, oh, you did the right thing, this is good because of the outcome. Like
Right.
outcomes matter, you know? And how is that weighed? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's just the waters get very muddy with that because it's, if you look at a scale,
It does.
how is
And
it all
again,
looked at?
it also falls short of the way that it's described in the Judeo-Christian sense, because the whole idea that God isn't judging that you're perfect. If you ascribe to the Judeo-Christian world, God isn't judging that you're perfect. He's rather judging your heart. And if you truly believed in him and attempted to reach the grace and glory of God, even though, again, by their very own claim, we will all fall short of.
Yeah, and lying could have been a part of that. Looking at the
Exactly.
heart, you wanted to save people. Okay, so that instead would be, you know, wiped clean as a sin and instead a good thing.
Yeah, well, I guess logically that would be the case, but we also aren't allowed to assume the mind of God. He might say that the lie was not worth saving the life,
Yeah,
but we can go down a rabbit hole with that. So
100%.
let's move on.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the next person here that comes on, I think, makes the best argument for this whole worldview.
It's interesting because it's actually where clarity on Peterson's stance actually comes to light.
Right.
Like, what does he actually mean by God? It took until over a half hour to finally shed some light on that.
Yeah.
That's frustrating.
It really is.
That should have been the first 5 seconds of the
And
video.
that's as much on Peterson as it is on every individual that came up.
Yeah.
Who just, I would have sat down and said, all right, let's define the terms you're trying to argue, right?
Yeah.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with like defining terms.
Yeah.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the
It's a
other.
hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you call it top or bottom, I
Yeah,
suppose.
right.
At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right. But at the
Or
bottom is
top.
God, and there
That's
are
a definition, yeah.
yeah. So at the bottom is God, and
Yeah.
there can be multiple people.
All right, so that's big, I think. He says that definitionally, at the bottom of every hierarchy
Of value.
of value is God.
Yeah.
So whatever is at your fundamental basis of your hierarchy is what God is.
And he said that specifically, every hierarchy of values.
yes, and again, he
Every
said it
means multiple.
definitionally.
Yeah. Every means multiple. The bottom of each hierarchy of value differs from person to person based off of their life. And so it's hard to even find the bottom. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if you were to even like look, it's strange. At what point do we reach the bottom?
Well, it would be at what for him. I would assume his argument would be that it would be once you reach what your moral high ground is, like your moral, the largest point of morality, which would be the inherent morality that we all carry, which would then be defined as God.
Yeah. But I mean, like as a word, like as a category of morality.
Yeah, exactly. It would be where, okay, so why did you do that? Why did you do that? And eventually it would be like, because that's the right thing to do. And when you get to that, because it's the right thing to do, that's your internal morality speaking that was given to you by God. Therefore, that is God.
Yeah.
That would be his argument.
People with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying
So they're not all equal. Like all foundational principles are not equal, even though they might be equally foundational. Right?
So what makes one kind of
So there he contradicts his original claim. So he went from everyone's foundation will be God to, well, foundations can be different for each person, and
They're also not equal.
they're not equal, and some of them are just objectively wrong.
Yeah.
So now you would have to explain which ones are and why are they.
Yeah.
foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So
Well, then
repetition.
it's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game, right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better, and what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily. So
Right.
it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
Harmony.
harmony,
Yeah,
right?
that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right.
Okay,
So we're talking about
okay.
within a system. That when we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stands independent, this thing is good. So
So that's fundamental there, that she's saying in order for your final claim to be God, it must be moral out of its own inherent properties. It can't be moral because of the system which it finds itself in.
Yeah.
So how
Objectively moral.
objectively, right? It has to be inherently and objectively moral in order for it to be God, because that way we can say that someone else's foundational system of morality is wrong and this one is right because this one is the one that carries that inherent quality.
Yeah, and all these qualifiers that he is saying that they have to be a part of seem arbitrary. Like, you could come up with a million other ones that like
Right.
are equally as valuable and applicable there. It seems like he's kind of pulling them out of a hat. Yeah, they make sense, but
I mean, you can essentially say any good thing and those things will
Yeah.
make sense with morality because we do have a somewhat basis of what is societally accepted as moral.
yeah, you could say rather than repeatability is bringing about the greatest net health, right?
Yeah,
I
there's
mean,
a million different things that could
Yeah.
be said in place of that.
Yeah.
His don't seem to drive us home to that idea, well, this one's going to be God.
yeah.
trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how.
There's an element of that that's true. So, for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. So Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently? Something that can...
So there he's essentially saying that the good that was inherent and fundamental was that Job had to endure the torture that he did because the ultimate good was still that God won that bet with the devil.
Yeah.
So I don't see how that example helps too much outside of just saying that, well, whatever happens is the greatest good because it was in the design of God.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that would be an equivalency, yeah. Yeah, whatever God intended. And everything's happening in accordance with that anyways.
Right.
can be good.
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you
I
mean
mean-
independent of people?
Independent of people, we can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay, I completely agree. So, in a sense, this is why...
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
So it's in reference to a goal.
So,
Or the goal would be the
but
imitation of Christ.
someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No,
Can
the
that be
thing
true?
that they want to be in
Oh,
congruent.
right, okay,
Hang
it
on
is
a-
God.
That's right. That's
Sorry,
right. That's right.
I
That's
corrected
good. That's
myself.
great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes, like that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because
That's a good question.
yes.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so someone can have a God, because in your definition,
That's not true. That's just not true. She asks, what makes someone a Christian? Because essentially he's saying just believing in that inherent good is God.
Yeah.
And if everybody to some degree has a fundamental basis of morality, that would make everyone a Christian through that definition.
Yeah.
But everyone isn't a Christian. So Dr. Peterson, please explain to me what would make one a Christian then. And his claim is, well, anyone who carries their cross, because that's metaphorically used in religion. Jesus carried the cross on his back to where he was crucified, was metaphorically him carrying our sins. So he's saying anybody who's willingly carrying the hardships of reality on their back and is working towards the ultimate good is Christian. That's not true.
No.
Because I would say
That's anyone in any religion.
exactly, not only in any religion, that's
Anything
essentially
in life,
anyone.
yeah.
Because the subjective all good everyone is reaching or striving to is based on the individual and what their specific goals are.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the cross that they carry, their sin, is not necessarily definitionally the same as what he's insinuating here. It doesn't really follow through. I think a more apt definition, there are fundamental things in Christianity that you must believe in order to be Christian. So in order to be Christian, you must believe that the resurrection happened. You must believe that God sent his only son to die for our sins. And you must believe that he did die with those sins and was resurrected and came back and all that.
Yeah.
That must be believed in order to be Christian.
Yeah.
However, he doesn't bring that up at all. And I think that is the fundamental part of Christianity. It's what the other Judeo-Christian religions don't agree on, right? The thing that moves you from Old Testament Judaism to New Testament Christianity is that you believe that Jesus Christ was resurrected.
Yeah.
That is definitionally what it is to be Christian, is to believe that Jesus resurrected.
Yeah. Yeah, it was super broad.
Yeah.
your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they
I
just...
know, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins, or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that like acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things.
That was his definition. So he just said, I don't believe that just because someone sacrificed, that is enough to be Christian. But that was the definition when she asked you just a bit ago, and what does it mean to be Christian? You said someone who carries the burdens of the cross on their back willingly. Yeah. That's definitionally what you just said. You're contradicting yourself now because she kind of got you in a corner by saying, no, Christianity is someone who believes in the resurrection.
Yeah.
But one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now the contrary to that would be something like you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right. So is that person Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right. So so you imagine that full Christianity would involve.
There, I'm a bit confused, right? He's saying that if you just act out the fundamental ideas of Christianity, that's enough to be accepted into heaven by God.
Yeah.
And to a degree, that is how it is explained in the Bible, because again, he judges the heart, not the words.
Yeah, but like actions would be equivalent to words in this case, because it's just an external shell of you, but that doesn't mean it's in alignment with your heart.
Yeah, but he's saying, for example, the Greek philosophers had and professed ideas that are in line with what he believes to be Judeo-Christian values. Therefore, they were, to a degree, practicing Christianity pre-Christian establishment. However, I don't think that logically follows even within the confines of religious text, or Christian text specifically, because forgive me, I don't have the exact scripture off the top of my head, but I know that it says somewhere that you have to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
And these Greek philosophers weren't doing so, so they wouldn't be accepted into the gates of heaven, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Even
because
though,
there
again,
have to be certain qualifiers that are exclusive to that religion. Otherwise, everyone's just going to the pearly gates because of the similarities within their religion.
If that's the case, then everybody who was just a decent person is getting in.
Yeah.
Which doesn't follow.
Yeah, because there is that draw of the exclusivity. That's where, so many followers come in, because it's like, no, you have to do this our way because this is the right way. This is the only way.
Right.
And I think that excuse me, there's there's a lot of parts in the Bible where God says not to do certain things that other people are doing, and you won't go to heaven. Like, for instance, when they create the golden calf, and God is angry, and like, if you're doing that in another religion, like, you can't. Like, there are
certain things that will be mutually exclusive with the teachings
Yes.
of Christianity, and even if you are leading a life that, as Jordan Peterson says, prioritizes self-sacrifice, you still won't be accepted into the
false
gates.
prophet is one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
Like, that's huge. Like, why would he let you in if, oh no, this whole time you were bowing to that one who doesn't even happen to exist. You picked the wrong one.
Right.
Why I'm not going to let you in. You dedicated your entire life to someone else, and God explicitly states he is a jealous God.
Yeah.
So you're going against the grain here. You're barking up the wrong tree.
And at this point, we're just like arguing the contradictions in the Bible, which is besides the actual point of the video. But yes, I think it's valid to bring up that what Peterson is saying doesn't align with Christian teaching.
Yeah.
A dozen things. And you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
Right. So then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like
8/12
that.
Christian.
Well,
but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like, I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
well,
don't understand.
I hesitate to do that personally because
Okay.
I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act
And how you say
and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So
right?
what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see,
Why in boxes?
like, when I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that
Yeah,
way.
Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
I think she did the best job out of the entire video.
100%.
She gets down to what Jordan Peterson specifically defines God as, what it is to be a Christian to Jordan Peterson. She got the most information out of him from any of the other people that were on the
she
panel.
allowed him to build the argument with qualifying questions and begged for clarity, and she got way more of it than anyone else, without a doubt.
100%. Here we have the next person that comes in. This one's a fairly short one, and it's the one that gets the big clips from everybody. The kid's pretty sassy to Jordan, and Jordan clearly gets upset, and the conversation quickly falls apart. I think he's only up there for a few minutes.
Yeah.
We're including this because I think it's important to show that even though Peterson was, in my opinion, this whole video arguing from bad faith, I don't like the approach that Danny took in either.
Yeah, it was disrespectful.
Yeah.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay, do Catholics attend to Mary?
Well, yes,
Okay, so do they fit that description of worship?
yes,
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
well, they might not put her in the highest
But you would
place.
put it that way.
No,
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
there's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to. Do
prioritize, and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to.
So I think he's not even making a very good argument there, right? Because Jordan has already spoken with the previous girl about there being a hierarchy, and I think he spoke even with the guy before that about hierarchy as well.
Yeah.
So is his argument that because Catholics will have Mary in that hierarchy, then by definition she is God? Is that what he was trying to get to?
It seems like that's what he's trying to get at.
But
yeah,
Jordan,
like Mary's God. Like
yeah, but Jordan has already explained
There's
that there's
levels
a
to it.
hierarchy. Even there, he said she's a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
yeah.
I don't even see what the argument he was trying to make. It doesn't seem like a very good argument.
You
My
understand? You
definition,
understand?
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend a
So you can
Catholic.
attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
And now you're adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
how do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either
it,
you're a
'cause
Christian
I won't
or you're
talk to
not.
you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something. You are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
So yeah, there was nothing productive said in that exchange at all.
Yeah. I think it was just a byproduct of the bubbling to the surface of frustration that everyone was having with the ambiguity of his stances.
For sure, but I just don't think Danny handled that very well.
Oh, no, it wasn't warranted whatsoever, but it was just a reflection, I think, of
The
that.
whole "you're nothing," the way he was asking his questions, the
Yeah.
wide eyes and nodding and enunciating every syllable.
Are you aware of the Immaculate Conception? Are you familiar with it? Like, what kind of question is that? Are you aware of who Jesus Christ is? Like, you might as well be asking something
Exactly.
like that.
It was bad faith on both ends, and his just blatant disrespectful demeanor sets Jordan off, and Jordan also then gets back with his passive aggressiveness that's been building up throughout the video.
Yeah.
And it was just a bad exchange overall.
Yeah, it was a waste of time. That could have been utilized more efficiently.
100%.
Wait, to make a quick statement, that's the thing that's also kind of annoying is he's the one getting interviewed right now by tons of other platformers. Interview that other girl that made amazing arguments and really got a lot of detail out of him. From videos I've seen, I haven't seen her getting any applaud or any hey, come on our show and let's talk about what happened.
I don't know if she's a content creator.
Fair, she might not be.
I've never seen her before. I mean, she's clearly must have gotten some type of recognition and popularity in this video because she does do a great job.
Yeah.
Maybe she is a content creator. I don't know. Wherever you are, good job. You killed that.
She really did.
All right, so now we're getting into the last person we're going to be going over here. And Peterson's claim now is that atheists accept Christian morality but deny its fundamental stories.
Yeah.
So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think. It's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think
Yeah, I
that
know
if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's the main character. When we're talking
How
about
do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So
How do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. But sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with
Well,
that
I just think
question?
that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. That like the Christian
I
God
didn't
isn't
say
like
that.
Christian
I
ethical.
said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through
Thank
the
you.
example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line
That's a
with
good
Christian
question.
ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in
It's such a sidestep.
Not only is it a sidestep, right? But I think it's a problem with him not even answering the question that was asked to him to begin with, right? This has nothing to do with the blood-soaked past of human history.
Yeah.
We are talking about specific commands given by God to his chosen prophets to then hand down to the chosen people, the Israelites, to then go and commit a genocide in Amalek.
Killing babies and
Everything,
animals.
everything. He literally said, don't leave anything alive.
Yeah.
Man, woman, children. He goes on even animals, ox, sheep, camel. I think he lists. Leave nothing alive. So this isn't a matter of the blood-soaked past of human history. This is God giving specific command to his prophet so that his prophet could then pass on to the chosen people of God.
Yeah, something I think that is annoying within Peterson's argument here is he tries to muddy the stance by saying, well, war is messy and it's very morally ambiguous. Like, where do you stand within a war? Is there a morally just war, etc.? Like, no, let's look contextually at the explicit words God has spoken,
right,
and dissect their morality. Like, let's just
because again, we're not arguing is this war moral or not.
Yeah.
We're saying God gave these orders, so therefore they must of necessity be in line with God's morality.
Yeah.
And if they are, that must of necessity be in line with Christian morality, because Christian morality, like he said, is definitionally God.
Yeah.
He's sidestepping this by saying, but like history of human morality is different and all these other things. And how do we conceptualize the morality of war? None of that has to do with this.
Yeah.
This is solely about the idea that God gave what he, of necessity, must be perfect morality because God is perfect.
Yeah.
He gave orders that must be morally perfect to go and commit this genocide. And if they are the morals of God, they are the morals of Christianity.
Yeah.
How do you say that's the truth?
Yeah. It's frustrating because they're so easily supportive of the good things, but when it comes to the bad, they play this card rather than, doing the same thing with like, oh, he did something good. Well, let's look at it with the same critical lens.
Yeah,
like
it's always concrete and exact when it's good.
Yeah.
When it's bad, well, interpretation and nuance and the history of man and well, men have free will and therefore sin is man's fault.
Yeah.
There's always a bunch of different caveats for why bad things happen in Christian history, but it's straightforward when good things happen. That must have been God.
Yeah.
A manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
but this one
people,
certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
well, a genocide can be a war, but
Absolutely not.
Look.
The genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible.
An important thing that I think needs to be brought up here is that the difference in the delivery of just by God, because the justification given is, like he said, the Amalekites did a bad thing 300 years ago.
Yeah.
So God then commanded a genocide on them as repayment for their sins.
Very
right?
delayed reaction, but yeah.
Pretty delayed, but that's not even the worst part, because the argument for that can just be, well, 300 years to God is nothing.
Yeah.
The real argument is, why is it different? So when the Israelites were shrouded in sin, he sent his only son to die for their sins so that they may be given another chance. When the Amalekites commit sin, we commit genocide on their entire place.
Yeah.
Spare not even a goat or sheep. Why is this application so different?
Yeah.
And that's going to just fall back on the idea that the Israelites are the chosen people of God, and God made that covenant with Abraham that insofar as they will accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior,
like humans
he
just
has
have
made
different
promises
values.
to them. Exactly.
insane.
To God, the Israelites had more value than the Amalekites.
Yeah.
They deserved a second chance, not only a second chance, but the second chance of Jesus dying for their sins.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress
So
what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm
Okay.
addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great and all, like the
think
great
it's a
making
definition.
qualities.
Sure,
Yeah,
by
like
definition.
flawless. Yeah. So,
Okay,
so,
so
does a
wait a
flawless
sec,
thing
wait a
change?
sec.
Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
There he hits perfectly on my issue with what Jordan was saying to begin with. Jordan's argument there was, well, the Bible isn't to be read in a microcosm. It's to be read as a thing that evolves across the stories and the books of the Bible. The morality is based in the initial like fundamental idea, thou shalt not kill, that is expressed in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And then that fundamental moral basis builds throughout the stories, eventually culminating in Jesus Christ dying for our sins and then reborn into a more good society, or more morally just, or more whatever. Essentially, he's saying it changes over time.
Yeah.
And he hits exactly the nail on the head with the question of, is God maximally good and great? Because if he is, why did he need to tell humans morality as a story?
Yeah.
Why did he have to do this in stages where atrocities like the genocide of the Amalekites would need to happen? If he is maximally good, maximally loving, and maximally powerful, he would have told them the right thing from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Why did he need to wait for these atrocities to happen, send his only son to die for the sins through immense torturous pain,
Yeah.
to then reveal to the Christians what it is actually to be good?
Because he works in mysterious ways.
And that answer is not sufficient.
It's not. But it's the only answer.
Exactly. It doesn't make sense. And so I like that, and I want to see how Jordan responds to that.
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
That's totally fine, but
No,
presumably...
no. You don't get to skate over
because
that
this is a
with
straw man.
that's totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In what
the
way?
argument
No,
is
wait,
that God...
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm already
said
waiting a sec.
find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't
and
say any
just
of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation
rephrase.
you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously, I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
Okay. Rephrase your question so that, because I must
Sure.
have missed it. I
So-
tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral,
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
our understanding might, but
Okay, how
presumably
do we
what the perfect
distinguish?
being
How do
is
we distinguish?
revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do
So,
we distinguish between whether...
between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself?
Between our
we can only,
unders-
yeah, well, we can only
Presumably
see
a
through our
perfect
own
being,
lenses.
presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time
how does
is
something-
revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So in
Like,
this
for
case-
example, are you
well, yeah, I
perfect in
blame this-
attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain
like
free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
Wait
if
a sec. Wait, let's
well,
not go
wait,
to that
because
yet.
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you
I'm
said,
saying
why
that's
wouldn't God?
incoherent.
Well,
It's
a thousand
contradictory.
years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you, but
Yeah,
have
and
it your
a
way.
thousand years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool.
I don't-
So then the
I
free will
don't-
of theodicy fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you want to
tried
respond
to
to
make
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with
Okay.
his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
It just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, under
Like
your
I said,
view,
if
under
you want
your
to have
view,
it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue we're
Do you
discussing.
acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone
So-
like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world,
doesn't mean determined.
it's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it determined.
This has now
Causally
devolved
inevitable.
into just a free will debate, which I have to agree with Jordan here. It doesn't really,
Resonate with the topic.
yeah, it has nothing to do here. Of course, Jordan did open the Pandora's box there by dropping in that free will necessitates, or that we would forego free will if God had made us perfect to begin with. But
He didn't need to bite the bait. It kind of created a
yeah,
deviation
huge
of the discussion.
segue. Jordan Peterson, in another section of the video, though, addresses this same idea of the issues of what exists or how we can reconcile the atrocities of the Bible. And he does that when he's presented with the idea of slavery. So they tell him, well, slavery is a thing in the Bible, and that's not morally just. So how can we possibly be in alignment with Christian morality if this is part of Christian morality?
Yeah.
And Jordan Peterson brings up the idea that in Exodus, Moses frees the Israelite slaves from Egypt. And because he does that, this is obviously God telling us that slavery is wrong because he freed the Israelites, right? And if he freed them through the order of God, then God disagrees with slavery, right?
Even that logic still doesn't make sense though, because you could want to just free the people. Like you could be in agreement with slavery, but not for those specific people.
Which is kind of exactly what God
Yeah.
its stance is.
Yeah.
Because if we just look at other sections of the Bible, we have Leviticus 44 through 46. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So if God is saying, if Peterson is saying that by God commanding Moses or helping Moses free the Israelites from servitude in Egypt, he is condemning the idea of slavery, then why is that in Leviticus he specifically says you can have slaves? They just got to be from the places around you. They can't be from the Holy Land. Those, we don't do that.
Yeah, and like to go even further, we have another Bible excerpt from Exodus 20 and 21. Like literal descriptions on how to actually treat them. This one says, anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slaves die as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers, since they are their property.
So with that one, I think it's all the more telling, right? So on the one hand, he's giving you instructions on how you can discipline your slave, and that you are only to be punished if that slave dies as a result of your discipline. But if they recover, that's fine, because you can discipline your property however you like, as long as you don't commit murder. But another layer of that I think is so important is, let's look at what Peterson was pointing to say that God disapproves of slavery. It was the story of Moses freeing the Israelites from Egypt in Exodus. This is in Exodus as well. So in the very same book that he supposedly denounces slavery, he goes on to tell you how to punish your slaves.
It's the cherry picking to push the stance that you want to have.
Ephesians chapter 6, 5, he says, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ.
Well,
so... and we can just keep going on, and there's so many here. He's saying that your slaves must obey their masters like they obey Christ.
That seems to go against the religion, actually, if anything.
It does.
That's insane.
That is very insane. And clearly, a God who says that isn't...
because that's asking for worship.
You're meant to worship.
But then that worshiping of that person would be a false prophet. He's against false prophets, but he's asking you to. That's contradictory
it's all
to
contradictory.
A core element of the religion and God's needs. Yeah, that's pretty damning. It is disturbing. And there's so much evidence to go based off of to argue that without a shadow of doubt, slavery is. Not only imposed and taught, but just what is that terminology to like enforce? Do it. Like this.
Here's a to-do list. Here's a how-to. Here's a DIY for your slaves at home. Peter chapter 2, slaves, irreverent fear of God. In irreverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. So, slaves, you're supposed to, as a result of your irreverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters. So it is an act of good Christianhood for a slave to submit themselves to their masters. And in addition, not only to those who are kind, but also those that are harsh. There's so many more, and we can keep going, but like it'd be kind of like beating a dead horse at that point. But to say that because Moses, at the direction of God, freed the Israelite slaves from Egypt is a case for him denouncing slavery when all these other scriptures
and a stretch.
exist, It's more than a stretch. The real thing, the real claim you can make when you take in the totality of all these things is that God denounces slavery for his chosen people.
Yeah.
He denounces slavery for the Israelites because he made the covenant with Abraham to always take care of the Israelites.
Why would anyone want to practice the religion if you are, like, let's say hypothetically, like, yeah, they're the chosen people. Anyone outside of that is tossed aside. Like, you're looked at as slaves. You're looked at as like these.
Well, yes and no. So I forget the exact thing. I forget which section and which book it is, but I think it's Peter also who says, or it might be Paul. I don't remember. I don't know the Bible off the top of my head, but essentially he says there is no Jew or Gentile, no slave or free man, no man or woman, because in the eyes of God, we're all his kids.
Yeah, but like that's not the case because this goes against that.
Yes, it does. Because again, remember, which one is it? Peter 2:18, slaves in irreverent fear of God, submit yourself. So the good slave that does submit themselves to their masters due to their fear of God will be accepted into the gates of heaven because he is doing so in the fear of God.
Okay, I see.
And just to go back to that one that I just paraphrased, people will use that to say that he's also disapproving of slavery in that case because he says there is no slave or free man. That's not true. I think that is a very cherry pick thing that you're trying to interpret that to say that he's saying there's no such thing as slaves, to say that there's no that slavery is wrong.
Yeah, you're telling them to beat them. And have
not
these
only that,
people.
but like we need to take that whole section in its totality. He says, in the eyes of God, there is no Jew or Gentile, there is no slave or free man, there is no man or woman, because in his eyes we're all his children.
Yeah.
If we're saying that when he says there is no slave or free man, he is meaning that those two things don't exist.
Yeah.
Is God also saying that no, man and women don't exist?
I mean,
Because if you're as a Christian going to use this verse to justify that God is saying slavery shouldn't exist, you're also must of necessity believe that the transgender movement is correct in that men and women don't exist.
yeah, and if it's all in that same sentence,
Right.
it would make sense.
But clearly that's not what Paul is saying that God
Yeah.
said to him there.
100%.
He's saying that these labels which do exist in the earthly realm don't matter to God because to him, we are all his children in his eyes.
Yeah.
He's not saying that these labels and categories don't exist within the earthly world. God definitely believes that man and women are a thing, that Jew and Gentile are a thing, and that slave and free man are a thing. He is saying that when you come to the gates and he passes judgment, those things don't matter to him then.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that was just an extra little bit there. I think that really concludes everything we wanted to go over with this video. To sum everything up, I think, like we said, Jordan Peterson didn't really do a good job of presenting his arguments, of really substantiating them, or even fighting back to a lot of the claims that these people were making, right?
Yeah, and even the arguments themselves were weak, and atheists don't know the God they're arguing against. Like, there were so many that kind of just didn't hold water and didn't even prove or argue to prove the existence of a God.
Right. Even the very last one, atheists accept Christian morality but deny the foundational stories.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, so many different religions have overlapping moral codes.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean you believe the specific religion.
Yeah.
It's very odd, right?
Yeah, and as a blanket statement, it's false. Like, atheists accept Christian morality. Like, sure, there's some things that atheists don't take from Christian
slavery.
morality. Yeah, slavery, abortion, etc.
Gay rights.
Yeah, gay rights. And so that at just face value is incorrect, and to be so easily dismantled without even needing like argumentation, it's just weak. And both of us, of course, expected more from a seasoned veteran in this field of theologian debate.
One of the best.
Yeah.
I remember when him and Sam Harris were just considered the pinnacle of academia.
Yeah.
And that seems to have just died.
Yeah. Yeah. It's frustrating, but This video has just gotten a lot of traction, and we'll look with curiosity to the future of
Where Jordan Peterson
where's he gonna go, like what is he gonna talk about. I wonder if he's gonna openly speak about the reactions and maybe for himself clarify his stance a little bit more, because just about everyone's a bit confused on this.
I mean, who am I to give Jordan Peterson advice, right? But I think he should step back. This is a moment where, like, you know how in sports they say, leave the sport before the sport leaves you.
Yeah.
Don't play it. Like Tom Brady shouldn't have played out there till 50 because he was falling apart, type of thing. This is kind of those moments. This is like when you see that Peyton Manning's arm just wasn't the same in that last Super Bowl. We're seeing Jordan Peterson's not the same anymore. I think this is where he should start to take a step back. I think this is an example of the sport leaving him.
It's definitely possible. Yeah.
But
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we will. That's everything.
Thank you guys for joining us.
Yes, definitely. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.